Robert Salas, a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy, served on Air Force active duty for 7 years. He holds a master's in aerospace engineering from the Air Force Institute of Technology, a master's in education from the University of Washington. He worked as an engineer for Martin Marietta Aerospace, for Rockwell International, spent 22 years in the Federal Aviation Administration. And he is just about to talk about something that's going to make you drop your teeth. Welcome, Robert, to Dreamland.
Thank you, Whitley, and thank you very much for inviting me. I'm looking forward to this.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you. Robert has written a book called Faded Giant, forward by an old friend of ours, Raymond Fowler, who has been on Dreamland many times. This is about some incidents that are really unknown and yet of extraordinary importance to us as human beings and to our understanding of our place in this universe. Robert, where were you serving in 1967, if I may ask?
1967 I was stationed at Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana. That's right outside of Great Falls, Montana, about the middle of the state.
And what were you doing there?
Okay, I was assigned as a missile launch officer, which means I would go on alert status at one of the missile, what we call the Launch Control Center. And at those locations, we were able to control 10 nuclear missiles. This was the Minuteman 1 system at the time.
Right. And
go ahead.
Where were the launch centers, actually? Were they underground, or?
Yes. These were underground capsules. There was a topside area where guards and we had cooking facilities up there. But mainly our facility, our launch control center, was underground, 60 feet underground, in a hardened capsule made of concrete and steel, and it was supposed to withstand a nuclear blast overhead.
I've been in one of those, and I had my doubts about whether or not that was really true.
Right.
Some of the guys in there seemed to think that it would really ruin their day if they got bombed from above.
Yeah, we were hoping they'd never tested it out real time.
Yeah. Now, that was an incredibly sensitive job. That you were highly trained for that, as I understand it.
Yeah, we had pretty extensive training. I think I would say over 8-9 months period. We had extensive training before we became operational crew members, and of course we had to go through qualification tests and that sort of thing. But it was our first line of the strategic concept of nuclear deterrence.
Now, were you concerned about possible entries into the area where the missiles were kept? In other words, was there a lot of security around the area?
Well, as I said, we had security guards upstairs, and we had the ability to monitor the security status or of the missiles themselves. We had
how did you go about? What systems did you have to monitor with?
Well, basically, we could detect any motion at the launch facility. The launch facilities were, as I said, we had 10 of them for each launch control center. They were located 1 or 2 miles away from the LCF.
So it was spread out, like you were in the middle of a circle of.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And at the launch facilities where the missiles were actually located, we had detectors at the fences and the gates and all around the facility, really, to detect any kind of motion or disturbance of any of the access doors that we had there.
And you never probably never experienced it. Maybe deer or something would come along, or
Oh yeah, we'd get all kinds of animals. Of course, there were elk, there were rabbits, deer, all kinds of animals there. So we did get indications from time to time, and then we'd have to send our guards out there to check it out.
were there ever any intruders?
Not that I know of. No, you mean human intruders?
Yeah, exactly. No one ever came out and actually tried to approach the missiles.
No, not to my knowledge.
Yeah, just elk and whatnot.
Right.
So that was a pretty exacting job. You were down in there sitting and waiting to punch the button. How many hours a day?
Well, we were on duty essentially 24 hours, and then until we got relieved by another crew, and we'd do a changeover, and then we'd be off for maybe 3 or 4 days, and then come back on alert.
So you had sleeping quarters down there then?
Well, we had a cot down there with a privacy curtain around it. It was pretty cramped down there. It was pretty well filled with computer equipment, electronic equipment. In those days, we didn't have miniaturized computers.
Right.
All this stuff was air cooled and got a little chilly down there at times, but yeah, it was pretty cramped down there.
How many of you were on the station at any given time?
At any given time, there were just two of us down there, a crew commander and a deputy crew commander. And
you went through drills and got codes from above and so forth during your time down there, I presume.
Right. We had drills. We mostly, coordinated any maintenance that had to be done. Made sure the missiles were on alert, ready to go in case we got the call.
Yeah. Did you ever were you ever face to face with any of these missiles? Did you ever see them go into, outside of their launch tubes, or how did you feel about all of this? It's a fascinating. You sat down there for years waiting for this for this terrible war that never actually happened, but it could have happened at any time.
Yeah, well, certainly we thought about the possibility of a nuclear war. No question about that. At that time I was a career officer, and so were all of us. Really, we were pretty dedicated. Like you say, we were well trained, so we had little doubt that we'd carry out our mission. Even as horrible as that sounds, but
right.
We were trained to do it, and if given the order, we would have done it. I mean, it's just as I think back on it now, it's just a horrible thing to think about. Starting their war.
Now, are any of those launch centers still active? I think they are, aren't they?
Absolutely. There's still plenty of missiles out there at Malmstrom and other locations across the country.
I was at the one in Minot in North Dakota, researching a book back in the early 80s, 82 or 83, long before I had any close encounters of the third kind, and it was quite an experience to go down into one of those places. It was just awesome, and to see these guys who had literally had their finger on the trigger, waiting for word from the president. It was something else. I watched them go through a drill, and it was scary.
Yeah. Yes, it is scary, and it's one of the reasons I've been speaking out. As we go through my account of my incident,
yes,
get into that, but
we'll get into that in just a minute.
Thing.
Well, exactly, and you had a situation where basically you were in a very secure facility. Nobody ever approached these missiles except elk. But then somebody did. And folks, when we get back, we're going to start talking about just what happened in Robert Salas's life back in 1967. And as I said at the beginning, get ready to drop your teeth, because we weren't alone out there in those missile silos. No way. We'll be right back. This is Whitley Strieber. We're talking to Robert Salas. His book, Faded Giant, the 1967 missile UFO incidents. And now we are looking at a book here. I've got it right in my hand, and I have read it. And I have to tell you that it is a profound shocker. If I may ask you, why is it called Faded Giant in particular?
Well, we were looking for an interesting title for our book, and we're looking at some of the Air Force acronyms. Actually, Faded Giant refers to any kind of a nuclear incident, an incident involving either a nuclear facility or nuclear weapons. And it was used a long time ago by the Air Force as a way of describing such an incident.
Now, something happened beginning, I guess, in 1966, August 24th and 25th. Now, could you describe what this was?
Yeah, I wanted to show a kind of a trail of incidents which led up to mine. And the first one I talked about was an August 1966 incident at Minot Air Force Base, where a UFO was not only sighted by airmen over a missile site, but also detected on radar. And there was quite a bit of documentation about it. This was documented in Blue Book, and it did disrupt the UFO did disrupt communications between the launch control center and security guards. But anyway, it was a well documented sighting, and it occurred at Minot not too long before my incident occurred. Yeah.
And now, this happened in a country where officially UFOs don't even exist. It's all nonsense. Right now, if we were to call the United States Air Force and ask about UFOs, they would tell us that they don't study UFOs, that the book's been closed on UFOs.
Right.
But this was the most secure and most important, one of the most secure and most important facilities we possessed. And you've just told us that there was a clear, unquestionable UFO sighting above this facility.
Yes, absolutely. And it was documented, and officers, major and above, were even reported on this. And like I said, there was reports on radar, and all this was written up and filed in Blue Book.
Right, filed right in Blue Book, and folks, it's there.
Yeah, it's there if anybody wants to look it up. And,
except they don't look it up, because you read the introduction to Blue Book and it says there's nothing in this. And right. That's what the media took to be gospel, of course. They didn't read the book. They just read the introduction saying that there was nothing to it. And then you go into the book and you find a case like this laying there. Incredible case.
Right, exactly. And you wonder why, the Condon Committee, which I'd like to talk about a little bit more later, but you wonder why the Condon Committee didn't go into that further, that one itself, and discuss that at length.
Well, okay, I would like to talk, if you want to talk about the Condon Committee right now, that's fine. I wouldn't mind at all, because I know a lot about the Condon Committee, in that I knew Walter Orr Roberts, who was the man who was first asked by the Air Force to chair that committee prior to their asking Condon. And Dr. Roberts, who was then president of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and later president emeritus, told me in no uncertain terms that he would not share it because it was clear from the beginning that this was absolutely going to be a cover-up. There was no question about what the outcome was of the study from the very first. And he personally introduced me at the University of Colorado to give a lecture and to describe my close encounter experiences with a number of members of the Condon Committee sitting in the front row of the audience at his request so that they could hear for themselves what had happened to the American people as a result of this lying and this cover-up. And so I would like now, if you don't mind, let's talk a little bit about the Condon Committee, and then later we'll get into what I think, folks, is one of the most extraordinary and in many ways outrageous UFO stories ever told by a highly credible witness that we are talking to right now, and outrageous because it has obviously is a direct threat to our national security. We haven't been told about it. It's like it didn't exist. So if you could give us some ideas from your end about the Condon Committee, I would appreciate it very much.
Okay. Well, as you know, by early 1967, the Condon Committee was well engaged, and one of the members, Dr. Roy Craig, was informed of what I'll call the Echo flight incident. That's where we labeled our flights, alphabetically, and Echo was the one where we got the most documentation on and reports. So, at any rate, Dr. Craig heard, and I believe it was from our friend Ray Fowler, as a matter of fact, that
yes.
There was missiles shut down as a result of UFOs being sighted overhead and at Malmstrom Air Force Base. So that was one of the reasons he flew out there. The other reason was to speak with Lieutenant Colonel Lewis Chase, who happened to be the operations officer at Malmstrom Air Force Base, but he had a UFO incident himself back in 1957, I believe it was.
Who had?
Colonel Chase.
Colonel Chase had. Yeah, okay.
Had a UFO incident himself. He was a pilot of a RB-47 flying outside of Texas, Louisiana. Anyway, he was followed by a UFO for some 2 to 3 hours, and again, his whole crew saw the UFO and was on radar, etc. Anyway, it is also a well-documented case. But to get back to Malmstrom, Craig immediately went and talked to Chase and asked about the Echo incident, and Chase was kind of shocked that he even knew about it because it was still under investigation.
One wonders how Ray Fowler found out about it.
Well, Ray Fowler found out about it because he was working for Sylvania, who had a contract with the Air Force to on the some of the electronics or communication systems, and he had spoken with one of the missile crew commanders who was involved in one of the incidents, and he decided to go ahead and well, it's kind of a long story, but he decided to go ahead and give an interview to the Christian Science Monitor.
Right.
But at any rate, I think it was he that contacted Craig and got Craig interested. So Craig goes out there, talks to Chase. Chase is shocked that he knows about it and said that UFOs were not involved, and that he could get a final report later on from headquarters, Air Force. But so essentially, Craig just accepted that and turned around and went home.
But that's not quite what That's not quite true, though, what Chase said.
No, it's not true. Chase, I think, was, and we'll expand on this in a revision to Faded Giant, which I'm writing now, but Chase was involved in a cover-up. He really was, and we've got, I think, pretty good evidence of that. This is written evidence that Chase was had been directed essentially to cover up the UFO incidents at Malmstrom.
But the reality is very different. In your book, you talk about First Lieutenant Roger Meyer, who was Missile Security Operations Office, 862nd Combat Defense Squadron, who signed a report as follows, quote, "There was beyond any reasonable doubt, after considering all related factors of distance, weather, refraction, etc., an object at or very close to an altitude of 8,200 feet."
Well, that was the Minot case, I think.
Oh, I'm sorry. I've got my cases mixed up. But nevertheless, let's just go back to Chase then. We'll pick this up later. He was involved in a cover-up, and what I have to wonder is, what is all of this cover-up stuff about? And I have to ask your opinion of it as a person who's been very directly involved in seeing and experiencing the extraordinary effects of a UFO incident, and yet you also can see this cover-up. And what's your opinion of it?
Well, in my case, I absolutely agree with you that the Conant Committee, even before it was formed to whitewash the whole UFO incident business. And when Craig went down there and Chase helped to cover that part up, they didn't want the Conant Committee to know about the Echo and the Oscar shutdowns, because that would have required further investigation, and it would have blown up in their faces. So, but I think maybe what you're asking is, why does the Air Force want to cover it up?
I think it's a kind of rhetorical question. The cover-up goes on to this day. In fact, this subject, except for those people like me and most of my listeners who have had close encounters or seen UFOs, it's a dead subject. Nobody's really very interested in it outside of this small little ghetto. And yet, if they are really here, and folks, you're going to find out, there's a little question that they are not only here, but they are really interested in certain things that we're doing in just a few minutes. It's the most important thing that's ever happened.
Yes, I agree.
The most important thing that's ever happened, and we are not allowed to think about it because we're lied to.
Yes, and if you want my opinion as to why we're lied to,
yeah,
because the government, our government, which is entrusted for our safety, that's what they claim, that they're supposed to be taking care of us, in the national security and our safety and all that. They have no way of controlling these objects. They have no way of dealing with them. So if they admitted that they existed, they would have to also admit that,
we're helpless.
We don't know what to do with it.
I guess that's right. I guess if they admit that they exist, then they're going to have to admit that they do things like what you witnessed. And
right.
Folks, when we get back, get ready for it, because we're going to find out just exactly what Robert Salas witnessed and why he wrote Faded Giant. We'll be right back. Okay, we are back talking to Robert Salas. His book, Faded Giant, the 1967 Missile UFO Incidents. It's quite a book, folks, and it is very, very well worth your time. You can get it by clicking on the unknowncountry.com store tab, and don't miss it. Every week we do these shows and maybe sell 3 or 4 books, and So I know you listen to the shows because there's 250,000 of you out there listening to it. But you should get into some of this stuff. If it touches a nerve for you, you should very definitely do this. Get this book. Okay. Now, Robert, let's go down with Robert Salas into that Missile Command Center. And on one particular night, what happened?
Well, on this particular night, I was the one of the two of us who was on alert status. I was awake, probably reading an engineering book. I was studying for my master's degree down there, and I get a call from the topside guard. He says, well, sir, we've been seeing some strange lights up here, flying erratically, not making any noise, but making some very strange maneuvers, going very fast, and stopping on a dime, reversing direction, that sort of thing, making right-angle turns. And he just, wanted to see what I thought about that. I didn't think much of it. I just really hadn't thought much about UFOs, or even though there had been reports in the local newspapers of sightings, but I didn't think much of it. Really hung up on him and went back to my book. And then a little while later, probably within 5 minutes, he calls back, and this time he's screaming into the phone. He's really agitated. You can tell when someone's really upset and excited. He was scared to death. Said he was looking out his window there, and above the front gate, there was this large red pulsating object. It was glowing and pulsating, and just hovering right outside the front gate. They were all, had their weapons drawn up there, and all the guards, and he wanted me to tell them what to do next. And it just shocked to me. I didn't quite know what to say. I think I said something like, secure the perimeter fence, make sure nothing comes in. And then all of a sudden he said, I've got to go, sir, one of the guards got hurt. So he hung up. And then I went over to wake up my commander. And as I was telling him about the two phone calls, our missiles, we heard klaxons, and we have large bells and
right
down there.
Now, let's just back off for just a second. He said he had to go. One of the guards had gotten hurt?
Right.
So were they now disabled up there? What had happened?
Yeah, well, I was, wondering myself. I was thinking all kinds of things. So whether we were under some sort of an attack,
well, of course.
Or what? And especially when he said one of the guards got hurt. Well, as it turned out, one of the guards was so frightened by the object that he tried to climb the fence.
Good Lord.
And hurt his hand on the barbed wire that we had on the fence. So he got quite a gash in his hand. But anyway, to continue, as I was telling Fred Mywald, who was my commander down there, our missiles started going no-go. We normally...
They started... the klaxons meant the missiles were not working.
Well, they were going into shutdown mode, basically. So instead of green lights, we had red lights up there. And at a couple of sites, we had security incursions lights.
Which told you what?
Which told me there was something had either gone into the launch facilities, or there was some security violation there.
But these were basically motion detectors in those days.
Yes.
You didn't have video or anything.
No, we didn't have video, unfortunately. But
we
did have motion detectors all over the place at those sites, and they were fairly sensitive. But still, I had to go ahead and call upstairs and send guards out there to two of the sites. And Fred Mywald went through his procedures, which included checking the what we called Versa, which is just tape recording that tells us the kind of problem, the kind of fault we had at the missiles. And as I recall, most of those faults were guidance and control system failures. I recall all the missiles going down. My commander, Fred Mywald, who, by the way, is still alive and well, and has supported my statements here.
Yes.
He recalls maybe eight missiles going
down.
All 10 of them. But
now, your knowledge of this is, you're talking about things that are classified, as far as I know, aren't they?
No, everything I'm telling you and everything in the book is unclassified.
Now, why is that? Were you ever told not to talk about this?
Yes, absolutely. I was directed not to talk about this. This incident was classified secret, and so I didn't talk about it. I wasn't supposed to talk to anybody about it, not even my own wife or any of the airmen or any of the crew members. We weren't supposed to discuss this at all. But at any rate, I can tell you now, if you'd like, why I'm talking about it.
Yes, please do.
In 1994, I believe it was, I was in Seattle looking through a bookstore, and one of the books I picked up was Above Top Secret by Timothy Good.
Yeah. Yeah, we know Timothy. He's been on our show many times.
Yeah, he's a great investigator, but just happened to turn to a page, just thumbing through the book. You know how big that book is. I just happened to land on this one page, and it talks about missiles being shut down at Malmstrom Air Force Base during UFO sighting, and I about dropped my teeth. Said, "Hey, that's
so Tim Good had found out about it."
Tim Good had found out about it. Put it in his book, and so I, through a mutual friend, I contacted James Klotz, who's my co-author on Fated Giant,
right,
and asked him to send some FOIA requests, Freedom of Information Act requests, to the Air Force about this incident, and not mention anything about UFOs. We didn't want to alert the Air Force
right
on that issue, but just get more information on the shutdowns. Well, the Air Force writes back and said, this incident is classified. However, because it's been so long, we're going to declassify it, and we'll send you some documents. And so they declassified the Echo flight incident, which is where I thought I was at the time. Anybody who's ever had access to classified information knows the best thing to do with that is, if you're not going to use it, obviously, is just to forget it, and that's what I did.
Right.
I tried to forget this thing, and I had forgotten a lot of the details, including where exactly I was at the time of my incident. So I thought I was at Echo Flight, and so I started talking about this, and matter of fact, in 95, I was on the show Sightings.
Right.
And did that show, talked about this with another officer. And then in 96, I was on Art Bell show and talked about it then. So I've been going public for about 12, 13 years now.
And why do you feel a need to go public on this?
Well, for a couple of reasons. Initially, I wanted to go public because the fact that, and I do believe these are extraterrestrial objects.
Yeah.
Having been pretty much a technical person myself, and I knew what was going on in the Air Force at the time. But I do believe these are extraterrestrial objects, and I think the public has a right and a need to know that we have been visited by these objects. And I think that trumped, any qualms I had about not going forward, especially after the Air Force declassified the Echo incident.
And the declassified documents are right here in the book, by the way, folks. All of them. Plus fascinating pictures of these command consoles. And, you're talking ancient history here with these computers. I wonder what it's like down there now. It must be very different.
Yeah, it must be.
Yeah. But in any case, it's here in chapter and verse. Admitted. The Air Force never says that these were extraterrestrial objects doing this, but it sure doesn't explain what was doing it. Not at all.
Exactly.
Not at all. And
I have one witness that has told me that up through 1972, as a matter of fact, the Air Force was still trying to figure out what happened in these missile shutdowns. So they could not come up with a viable explanation for this.
Which is, of course, very ominous. Now, when we get back, we're going to get into some of the questions that this brings up, because obviously somebody shut down some of our missiles. Is there a why there? Why would they do it? We'll ask Robert what he thinks when we get back. This is Whitley Strieber, It's Dreamland. I'm talking to Robert Salas, the author of Faded Giant, the 1967 missile UFO incidents. And if you want proof that UFOs are real, as if we needed that at this point, if you read the documentation at the end of this book, you'll find that these events took place. It happened just like he's describing it. Just like he's describing it, word for word. Only, of course, the official documents omit any mention of possible UFOs. But, in fact, at the height of the Cold War, they showed up and shut down a number of our missiles. Robert, why would that happen? Have you thought about that?
Yes, I have thought about it quite a bit, and the conclusion I've come to is that this was a demonstration and a message. The demonstration being that they are here among us, and the message being we should not be involved with nuclear weapons. We should not be using these weapons as a means of for whatever reason we might think is a good reason, because obviously, and it should be obvious to anyone really by now, that we have the capability of completely destroying the planet and possibly influencing other planets and you know, with these weapons.
Well, there's also been always, in the world of UFO close encounter witnesses, a kind of thought that skips into the background every once in a while, that nuclear explosions do more than just explode in our world, that they can do things like destroy souls, that they're bigger than we think, and that we don't fully understand what we're doing with these explosions, and that this is perhaps it's
right.
Just fanciful and speculation. I don't know, but maybe it's true. Does this suggest to you that there's somebody out there who wants us to survive, or feels threatened by us, or is it both?
Probably both. I honestly think that this was a benevolent message, or a message to try to get us to see the light here. And I think they want us to survive. They want this planet. This may be a very, very precious planet, not only to us but to other beings in other places. And I really do think they want us to survive. By the way, I just want to mention a book recently published. It's called UFOs and Nukes by Robert Hastings. But I mention that because in that book, Hastings has done a lot of research about UFOs being sighted, and again, he's got multiple witnesses on most of these, but being sighted from the earliest days of nuclear weapons development. I mean, including the first blast during the development of the first bomb, but also the nuclear testing out in the Pacific later on. and again at Sandia Base and many other bases where nuclear weapons are stored. I can tell you from from talking to Colonel Halt of the Bentwaters case that the UFOs were seen hovering over the weapons storage areas. Go on and on, but there are many instances, not just the one I've written about, but many instances where UFOs have been sighted over nuclear facilities.
So this is, and also over various types of nuclear facilities, including nuclear power plants.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. And now let me ask you this. Let's go back to the missiles. They were shut down. They're now. What exactly had gone wrong with them?
All right. All these missiles are targeted, obviously,
right,
for specific locations, and that is a very sensitive procedure to target these missiles. But basically, what happened here, and somehow, and this is one of the conclusions the Air Force did come up with, is that there was some kind of electromagnetic pulse or electromagnetic energy that somehow sent a signal and disrupted the guidance and control system package in the missile itself. In other words, the missile didn't know where, if it had been launched, wouldn't know where to go.
Wouldn't know where to go.
Right. So
now, that's
why they shut down.
So their targeting had been disrupted.
Yes.
They hadn't been retargeted, though.
No, they hadn't been retargeted by the UFO. You mean? No.
Yeah.
No. They just disrupted the targeting system.
Now there was an incident in Russia.
Yes.
Are you familiar with that incident?
Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about it?
Well, just briefly, I know that there was an incident where one of the Soviet missiles, and this again was an ICBM, where a UFO was sighted at the missile site, and actually the missile started, without any Soviet technician being involved. The missile started on its launch sequence, and scared the heck out of them. And however, the launch sequence shut down before the missile could be launched. So.
And there was a UFO in the area at the time.
Yes, and there was a UFO in the area in that case, yes.
Now, when I was at Minot, and this must have been in like 1982, I was just there as a writer doing research for a thriller. It was actually a thriller called Black Magic. And so I was being taken around by the PR people, and they gave me a great time. They showed me the interior of a BF-52, and they took me down into one of the missile command centers, not a real one because a civilian couldn't go in there, but a mock-up of one, and I saw them go through drills and everything. However, when I was there, something had happened just before I came, involving some kind of problem with a flight of the missiles, and it was a targeting problem. And I've always wondered if that wasn't another one of these incidents, and do you know if there were any more?
I can't get to the specifics of whether there were other incidents involving targeting, but I do know that there have been many more incidents involving UFOs and missiles. I list some of those in the book, I believe, but at Minot Air Force Base, at Ellsworth Air Force Base, and again at Malmstrom in 1975, there was another very significant incident where UFO was involved with at a missile site, and again cited by a lot of witnesses. So, yeah, these things have been going on. We've got records up through I think the mid '90s. Now, of course, the Air Force does their best to keep their people quiet about these things.
Yes,
they've got something called Personnel Reliability Program, where they, if you start reporting UFOs, you kind of get bad marks, and of course you don't get promoted, that sort of thing. So, I think
unless you work on this on the inside, and there must be people who were deeply concerned about this and who must have worked on it on the inside as to exactly how it had been done and even who had done it.
Yes,
there must be.
Yes, like I said, there was a classified program going on at least through 1972 on the Echo flight incident. And I
right.
This is per a witness who was involved, and like I said, I'll put that in the revision to my book.
So the average Air Force individual who reports UFOs and so forth gets himself into a kind of trouble in that he's right. given bad marks, but somewhere on the inside there are people who follow all of this very carefully.
Yes, there must be.
There must be. And we, the people, continue to be left in the dark. And so we don't get a chance to really think about this seriously. Our best minds ignore it and look on it with disdain. Ask the great scientists of the world, and they will look down their noses at you for even asking questions about whether UFOs are real and aliens are here. But they are real, and they are here. And as Robert says, for some reason, they are interested in us and in what is happening here. And it's too bad, with all of this knowledge literally lying on the ground around us. For example, what exactly happened to the systems inside those Minuteman missiles? If we knew that, we would understand something about the capabilities of the objects that had changed the way the missiles function. But we don't get any of that information. We, the people, are left in ignorance. And aren't you tired of it? I'm real tired of it. And that's why you need to get engaged. Read a book like Faded Giants. Write your congressman. Send a copy of it to your senator. Do these things. Keep up the pressure, because otherwise they are just going to let this continue to emerge the way it has been, and that is not good. Robert Salas, I would like to thank you very much for being with us on Dreamland. Faded Giant is an excellent book, forward by Raymond Fowler, by Robert Salas and James Klotz. It tells it really like it is about some of the most fantastic UFO incidents and covered up UFO incidents in history. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Whitley. Appreciate it.
And now it's time to turn once again to the extraordinary edge of reality with Linda Moulton Howe. Linda Moulton Howe brings us the facts as they really are, the stories you won't hear elsewhere, the stories the general media dare not report, but which nevertheless are quite shockingly true. Today she has a remarkable report for us about some very unusual UFO events, apparently involving the United States Air Force, and the disappearance of an airplane. Now, UnknownCountry.com subscribers will remember a few years ago we had a remarkable audio tape of an airplane calling for help as they were being approached by a gigantic UFO. And then the plane disappeared without a trace. For subscribers, that is still available in the special interviews section of the UnknownCountry.com subscribers section. But now, let's go back to the more immediate future. We're going to go back to our Emmy Award-winning science reporter, Linda Moulton Howe, the editor of EarthFiles.com from Albuquerque, New Mexico. Here she is, Linda Moulton Howe.
Well, thanks, Whitley. It was 17 years ago, in March 1991, that I received a brown, legal-sized envelope by certified mail postmarked February 28, 1991, from Porterville, California. The envelope contained an audio cassette, letter, and drawings from a woman named Linda Porter, and it was about her abduction experiences since her teenage years. I felt her information was so important that I traveled to California to meet and interview Linda in person. Eventually, all of her drawings and insights were included in my third book, Glimpses of Other Realities, Volume 2, High Strangeness, including information about a location in the Poway region of San Diego that now seems even more relevant after a recent mail from a retired United States Border Patrol agent. My book is available at my news website, earthfiles.com, in the Earth Files shop. First, some background about Linda Porter's information. The primary non-humans in Linda's abductions were 5-foot-tall gray entities and smaller 3-foot-tall gray entities that Linda sensed were biological androids that worked for the taller gray beings. She also interacted with insect or praying mantis-looking creatures. She did not understand the relationship between the gray beings and the praying mantis types, but she was also allowed to see a different blonde-haired, non-human being during an out-of-body experience that was done by the non-humans, taking her out of her body, in which she was conscious of all details around her, but knew that her body was still in her Porterville bed. She began her description of this experience like this, quote, "The aliens told me in this out-of-body experience prior to 1991 about a place called the Sycamore Remote Facility run by General Dynamics, according to the aliens. It's located in Southern California and inland a ways from San Diego in the Poway region. It's supposed to be a missile testing site, but it is actually a holding area for non-human beings that have been captured by the United States government. Supposedly, there is one particular building that goes down 5 or 6 stories underground, and on the lowest level, there is a very large room where the bodies of alien people are being kept encased in containers. The containers are on a cement base. I don't know if they're plexiglass or what, but you can see through to see the person inside. And there is one particular being down there that the aliens want back. I was also given the impression that the creatures that are being held are still alive, but they're being stored in some sort of cryogenic form of suspended animation. The captured being looked very human. He doesn't much like the gray beings at all. He has some kind of silver mesh vest over his chest, and the rest of him is all in black. He has sandy, blonde-colored hair, and he has a very boyish look to him, although he's probably in his 30s. The whole Sycamore area is supposed to be full of underground tram systems that lead from the naval base in San Diego to this facility and to another place. The other place is the entrance, and believe it or not, it is through a garage attached to a perfectly ordinary-looking house sitting up against a hill in an isolated area. The garage is the entrance to an underground network that goes into the hill. If any of this is actually true, then there is an awful lot that the American public does not know, and our tax money evidently paid for this. I was also told telepathically by the aliens that 2 young Navy guys were killed by our government because the men found out about this place. And their families were told that they died on base in a Jeep accident, unquote. Well, I was able to confirm that near the intersection of Spring Canyon and Pomerado Road, northeast of San Diego, and directly north of the Miramar Naval Air Station, were several signs leading into Sycamore Canyon, including one which said, quote, General Dynamics, Sycamore Canyon, private property, no entry without permission, unquote. Beyond that entryway, the road slopes around and down, and you cannot see any buildings or guard shacks. I also learned that the entire area is off limits to overflights due to a 6,000 feet to ground level warning on flight charts. That airspace limitation might also be related to Sycamore Canyon being in the approach path to Miramar Naval Air Station, but nevertheless, planes cannot fly low over this area. Could Linda Porter's insights from her out-of-body journey that was provoked by the non-humans into this alleged underground facility east of San Diego, allegedly used to keep captured non-humans in a state of suspended animation, be true? If so, would it imply that the San Diego region could be a persistent focus of non-humans that want to free other non-humans in the underground facility? What leverage would non-humans have over the U.S. government? Historically, various military people have asserted that the American government tried to shoot UFOs out of the skies from the 1940s to 1950s in order to retrieve advanced technologies and to interrogate the non-human occupants. But according to military and intelligence sources, the non-humans have retaliated and have brought down human airplanes and electric power grids. UFO investigator Len Stringfield told me before he died that he had first-hand knowledge there was an American standing order to shoot down alien craft, but we ended up losing more than 2,000 planes and pilots before that standing order was rescinded in the mid-1950s. There are also rumors that the American military is still in a secret war with non-humans. If so, could that explain some modern unexplained air crashes or even airplane disappearances? On Saturday, November 1st, 2008, I received another provocative letter by hard mail with a map, this time from a retired U.S. border agent who worked for the United States from 1958 to 1995. That's a 37 years career in border security. His map was about very unusual underground bases in the Roswell, New Mexico region, including one disguised as a volcanic cone, but housing a silver disk surrounded by military personnel. I called him to follow up, and he is still nervous to talk about his experiences with his actual full name. So we agreed I would refer to him as Roberto. Surprisingly, before we got into the details of his letter and map, he mentioned seeing a bright beam of light emanating from a black fog bank above the hills east of San Diego. The year was 1988, and he was driving along Highway 94, not far from Tecate on the U.S. and Mexico border east of San Diego. Roberto was headed for a U.S. Border Patrol morning staff meeting in San Diego. The time was 5:30 a.m. The sun was not up, but in the pre-dawn, he could see puzzling black fog resting on the hills above San Diego.
And as I was looking to the west, it looked like a big fog bank was over the mountains, which was not unusual, but this fog bank was really dark. I mean, it was black. And coming from the south along the fog bank, low along the ridge of mountains, because you go down a valley what they call Barrett Junction, then you go back up again past a place called Hamul, and I saw this bright, really intense beam going along the mountain ridge, shining down, and it was like a beam you would see in an attic where it's dusty. It was that bright. And I looked, and at first I thought it was one of our Border Patrol helicopters because they were always working in that area with searchlights looking for aliens and things. And then I realized the beam was so intense, and it was going kind of behind the fog bank and then coming out and back in and out. Even behind the cloud bank or fog bank, the beam was really intense, way brighter than any of our helicopters would be. And I figured that when I got up over the rise that I would see fog hanging over San Diego like is common there, in the morning like that. When I got over the rise at Hamul, I looked to the west for San Diego, and it was totally clear. 2 days later, I read an article in the San Diego Union by a columnist who lived in Humboldt, who wrote a regular column for the newspaper, and he started out by saying, "Tell me if I'm crazy, but I saw a UFO from my home in Humboldt. If anybody saw what I saw," and he described it, exactly what I saw, "if anybody saw that, please contact me." Well, I did. I contacted him, and he said, "You're the 45th person who's contacted me." And all of them report seeing the same thing. In fact, some of them were people jogging on the beach that saw it, and they saw this strange, intense beam, and they saw it swallow up an airplane that was flying over the ocean there out to the west of San Diego.
Good heavens.
I said, wow, that is something. So he said, would you be willing to come on Channel 10 there with me? Because he said, you're the most credible witness that I have so far, being a law enforcement officer. Would you come on TV and tell what you saw, too? And I said, sure, I'd be happy to. Well, I went to the staff meeting, and I told our chief and the staff officers what I had seen and what I wanted to do. And the chief looked at me and says, what are you trying to do, make us all look like a bunch of crazies? I'm not going to allow you to take off and go down there and make a bunch of fools out of us. And I said, what? Well, there was another officer there who lived in Humboldt. He was a public information officer who I knew real well because he'd worked for me. He said, well, I saw it too, Chief. He said, well, you're not making a nut out of me too, you know. And he told me, he says, I deny your request to take annual leave to go down and appear on TV. I said, I wouldn't appear in uniform. I'd go down and play. He said, I don't care how. He says, you're not gone. Request denied. So I had to tell the guy I couldn't go. But anyway, there were some others that did. And I saw some drawings of what they had seen. It was identical to what I had seen, with a strange black cloud bank and this thing with this intense beam. And I don't now know to this day what it was, and I don't think anybody else does either.
But there's a possibility that the black cloud was obscuring the craft from which the beam...
The thing that really struck me as weird is when I went up over the grade, expecting to drive into the fog, because this fog bank was right there, it was gone, and everything was completely clear. It was the strangest thing.
Did any of the eyewitnesses find out any information about a missing airplane?
No, nothing more was said about it. There was a woman and a man who was jogging on the beach. I think it was the Silver Strand, but I'm not sure. They reported seeing the beam swallow up a small aircraft, like a Cessna or a Piper or something. But as far as I know, nothing more was ever done about a missing aircraft.
You sent me a map with a red 1 and a red 2.
Right.
Red 1 is near Portales and Fort Sumner, and number 2 is down near Fort Bliss Military Reservation. Could you start with your circle 1 between Fort Sumner and Portales and tell about what the significance of that one is, and then we'll move on to Fort Bliss.
Okay. The significance of that one is that there was a fella, he liked to play cards. We play poker and drink beer and stuff. So he got to tell us one night, he says, I know all you guys have been cleared, you got security clearances and all that. He said, I can tell you some stuff. He said, I've been working with some guys up in Las Vegas, and they work all over the country, in fact, all over the world, in different kind of installations. And he said, they were telling me that there's one close here, up between Roswell and Portales, out in kind of the desert there. He said they claim that there's an underground base of some kind, that they found this huge limestone cavern. He said it was way, way bigger than Carlsbad Caverns. He said it was so big, they told him that they could fly planes in and out of the thing. And they said they had a great big, like, sliding doors that were covered with sand and stuff to camouflage them. And he said they could open these doors up and fly a plane in and out of this place. These guys told him that they had worked in this thing, building this base. Now we'll go from circle number 1 to circle number 2. And that is located somewhere on the northern part of the Fort Bliss missile range, close to Alamogordo. And the story that I got was from an agent who worked for me at Indio, who had been called by an agent that he knew, I think it was his classmate in the Border Patrol Academy, called him from Alamogordo, where he was stationed, and said they'd gotten into some trouble. And they were going to be transferred out of there.
What year?
77. And he said that what had happened was that they had gone down, 2 of them, in the Jeep, and went on to the missile range where they weren't supposed to be, but they went prowling around down there looking for aliens and stuff, Mexican aliens. And when they got down a ways, and I can't tell you exactly where it was, but the story was that they'd seen this weird-looking kind of volcanic cone-looking thing. The description I heard was it was black. It wasn't really too high. I guess from what they said, it probably maybe 80 or 90 feet high or something. They said it looked really out of place, and it aroused their curiosity. So they got out of the Jeep and climbed up the thing because it was flat on top. And what they told the guys when they got up there and looked down, they saw there was like a concrete floor down in the thing, and there was a flying saucer parked down there being attended to by Air Force personnel. And they're going, uh-oh, we saw something we shouldn't have seen. So they climbed down real carefully and got out of there. Apparently were not detected, or at least they didn't think they were. When they got off duty that afternoon, the guys used to get together at what they call the watering hole there in Alamogordo, where a lot of the cops and the Border Patrol used to get together and have a beer after work and so forth. So they're in there having a beer, and they're telling the other guys what they had seen. Some little time later, a couple of guys came in plain clothes and tapped them on the shoulder and said, "Why don't you come with us? We want to talk to you." Well, it apparently was some security officers, plainclothes security officers from White Sands. They said apparently they wouldn't tell this agent what had transpired. All they said is, "We're getting transferred out of here on short notice." They were both going to the East Coast, and they were admonished not to talk about what they'd seen and so forth. Well, the guy who was in charge of the station, he's dead now, was the guy I had worked with. We were at Carlsbad, worked together for 5 years over there, and we're good friends, and I knew he was in charge there, so I called him on the government phone, and I said, "What do you know about some guys? What'd you hear?" I heard a couple of your guys went down where they weren't supposed to be and found a flying saucer in a volcano-looking thing. Got in some trouble with the base security. It was kind of a big pause, you know. Well, I knew this guy really well, and he was an ex-Marine, by the way. And I said, "Is it true?" And his big pause, he says to me very deliberately, "Not true, nothing to it." And that's all he would say. Well, I knew the way he said it, that it was true. Well, you know, when I was in Carlsbad, there was UFO stuff going on all over the state there. The UFO activity, I never saw one myself, but I talked to several people that had seen them and seen them up close. And some of them were state policemen. I think there was one over by White Sands where the state policeman saw it come down and land close to the highway, and he drove up to take a picture of it. Then the guys in the black suits showed up because he was talking to his dispatcher on radio, telling him what he'd seen and what he was going to do. He goes up and he takes pictures of it with his accident camera. And the guys in the black suits come zinging up. They were apparently monitoring the state police frequency, and they demanded his camera and pictures and everything. You know, they took his film away from him and everything. I told him, I said, if I'd been a state cop, they'd have played hell getting it away from me.
Wow. I guess. And what year would this have been?
Probably around 62, something like that.
Did you ever hear a description of what exactly were on his photos?
Yes, he described it as a typical flying disc, and he said it settled down and landed on the ground about a half a mile off the highway up towards Socorro, I think. And he said he drove over the little dirt road that led up to it. And he said he got pretty close. And he got out, and he started to shoot pictures, and it took off. So he said he went over to the area where it was sitting, and he took pictures of the marks in the ground where the tripod come down and was sitting on. And he said there were indentations in the ground there, and he got pictures of that. And then, about that time, all guys in the black suit came zinging up and said, "Hand over your film," and that was the end of that.
Given all of the high strangeness just this year of 2008 about projected three-dimensional symbols and strange lights in the skies of Stephenville, Texas, Kokomo, Indiana, Oswego, Illinois, Granville, Massachusetts, and other locations in the United States and Europe, and the possibility that there might be an Earth secret war between human military and non-human advanced technologies that can deceive with holograms and transport matter with beam technologies, perhaps like that airplane in that beam off San Diego. I would like to close this report with one of the most significant communications that I ever received from Linda Porter in 1991, allegedly telepathic information from a praying mantis entity. Quote, There is much, much more to existence than we could ever begin to understand. Much of what we have been taught regarding the physical universe and the laws that govern it is wrong. This creature's civilization communicates difficult concepts via the use of symbols that radiate emotion. They use this form to get concepts across with their exact true meanings intact. No misinterpretations can occur this way. The symbols are not mathematical ones, but appear as three-dimensional holographic pictures that resemble abstract sculptures. The emotional aspect is relayed via carrier waves that resemble sound waves, but are not part of the human sound spectrum. These waves can be felt but not heard. If the creatures want to clear a certain area of humans, they can broadcast this carrier wave over the area at a certain frequency, and it will create intense fear in people, causing them to flee the area. It does not cause any harm, so they say. And a note, I did some checking. Most humans cannot hear frequencies at all below 125 hertz or above 10,000 hertz. She went on, the universe is built on sound patterns, which is why so many different world dimensions can exist in the same space. Each is on a different frequency. Disrupt a world dimension to the point that you destroy the carrier wave it exists upon, and you have created a hole in existence that cannot support the dimension above or below. Each frequency, besides maintaining its own world dimension, also supports or holds in place the one above it and below it. Everything is interdependent. There are literally hundreds of different alien life forms here trying to stop what is happening, as it is putting their own worlds at risk. Some, as I had mentioned in earlier letters, are not supposed to be interfering, but are doing so anyway. What they are all trying to do is stop the ripple effect that will emanate outward from us should an American government experiment that is ongoing succeed. With all of their technology, Linda, why don't the aliens or their superiors just walk in here and stop the whole thing themselves? Why do they need us abductees to speak for them? Something just does not make any sense. I wonder if we are being lied to, used for some purpose to put over ideas they want us to believe. If there is an experiment, maybe if it succeeds, it will put us in competition with the aliens for something they don't want to share. Maybe they're trying to scare us out of their neighborhood. Unquote. Linda Porter, 1991. When you put all this together, Whitley, from the U.S. Border Patrol to the stories and accounts that you have had on the disappearing airplanes, all of the first-hand encounters that I have interviewed people, sometimes off the record, about seeing animals raised up in beams of light. The incredible story just recently by the man in Empire, Ohio, who was watching something that reminded him of a glowing cocoon being raised up to some large triangular craft in the sky. And all of those strange, extraordinary, pulsing three-dimensional symbols over the Stephenville airport back in January of 2008 that somebody in this government worked overtime to try to convince the public and the media that it was a malfunctioning digital camera.
You know, Linda, before your broadcast, I mentioned to you that last week's Empire, Ohio story had a very strange effect on me because I'm in the process of writing a new novel about aliens.
Right.
And the book has a cocoon is involved in it. It's not the same story at all as the man from Empire told of a cocoon being carried up into a triangular ship. But it is also, these are the only two cocoon stories I know of in the whole UFO lore. Now, that's an odd coincidence, but it gets much stranger today. Today you mentioned symbols that affect the mind, that and shapes that can radiate fear. I'm working in the chapter I'm writing now on just such concepts.
Huh.
Now, I have to ask myself, how can this be a coincidence? It's very mystifying. I guess one just has to accept the fact that those of us who are involved in this live in a certain way. And the eerie story of the disappearing plane, how can this be reality? When you walk out on the streets or you open the newspaper, you look at the television, reality is entirely different from this.
Right. It's not
and yet,
reported.
It shows an image of an Air Force heavily, deeply, apparently involved in something that, and you just have to wonder that so few people have ever come out. Are we looking at the United States Air Force, or are we perhaps looking at people from another world? I do know that years ago there was a study done by the General Accounting Office on the sources of funding for numerous Air Force projects. And there was an Air Force base found that looked like an Air Force base. The people were paid with checks that apparently came from the United States Treasury. But in fact, the base didn't exist. The checks could not be traced anywhere at all. I don't know any more about it because it then became a classified matter, and the person who was talking to me about it could not talk to me about it any further. But it suggests, doesn't it, that the praying mantis-like creature, and they have incidentally figured prominently in my life recently as well, in another context entirely. The praying mantis-like creature was not kidding when he said that this world is much stranger and much more complex than we think.
And what you have just said supports also what I have gotten from so many different people who have had military and intel careers and have talked to me really only off the record, and therefore I can't prove it. But when they have talked to me about, quote, Earth's secret war, unquote, they have done this in the context that someday the humans at MJ-12 and in all the military and intelligence services that have been involved with Majestic 12 and the extraterrestrial biological entity or other dimensional or time traveler or whatever the source of all of this non-human intelligence is, when the truth could be known based on what they knew, that they would all be looked at as super patriots who were actually trying to help this planet at a time when the governments woke up to the fact that the Earth was being used for somebody else's purposes.
Well, Linda, I have to agree that it would be very pleasant to be thought of as a patriot instead of grumbled about as a CIA shill, which I, of course, am not and have never been and don't know anything about at all. Linda Moulton Howe, thank you very much. There's a lot more to say on this subject, but we have run out of time. Never miss a week of Dream the area.
Well, as I said, we had security guards upstairs, and we had the ability to monitor the security status or of the missiles themselves. We had
how did you go about? What systems did you have to monitor with?
Well, basically, we could detect any motion at the launch facility. The launch facilities were, as I said, we had 10 of them for each launch control center. They were located 1 or 2 miles away from the LCF.
So it was spread out, like you were in the middle of a circle of.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And at the launch facilities where the missiles were actually located, we had detectors at the fences and the gates and all around the facility, really, to detect any kind of motion or disturbance of any of the access doors that we had there.
And you probably never experienced it. Maybe deer or something would come along, or?
Oh yeah, we'd get all kinds of animals. Of course, there were elk, there were rabbits, deer, all kinds of animals there. So we did get indications from time to time, and then we'd have to send our guards out there to check it out.
Were there ever any intruders?
Not that I know of. No, you mean human intruders?
Yeah, exactly. No one ever came out and actually tried to approach the missiles.
No, not to my knowledge.
Yeah, just elk and whatnot.
Right.
So that was a pretty exacting job. You were down in there.
We thought about the possibility of nuclear war. No question about that. At that time I was a career officer, and so were all of us. Really, we were pretty dedicated. Like you say, we were well trained, so we had little doubt that we'd carry out our mission. Even as horrible as that sounds, but
right.
We were trained to do it, and if given the order, we would have done it. I mean, it's as I think back on it now, it's just a horrible thing to think about. Starting their war. Now,
are any of those launch centers still active? I think they are, aren't they?
Absolutely. There's still plenty of missiles out there at Malmstrom and other locations across the country.
I was at the one in Minot in North Dakota, researching a book back in the early 80s, 82 or 83, long before I had any close encounters of the third kind. And it was quite an experience to go down into one of those places. It was just awesome, and to see these guys who literally had their finger on the trigger, waiting for word from the president. It was something else. I watched them go through a drill, and it was scary.
Yeah. Yes, it is scary, and it's one of the reasons I've been speaking out. As we go through my account of my incident,
yes,
get into that. But
Robert Salas, a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy, served on Air Force active duty for 7 years. He holds a master's in aerospace engineering from the Air Force Institute of Technology, a master's in education from the University of Washington. He worked as an engineer for Martin Marietta Aerospace, for Rockwell International, spent 22 years in the Federal Aviation Administration. And he is just about to talk about something that's going to make you drop your teeth. Welcome, Robert, to Dreamland.
Thank you, Whitley, and thank you very much for inviting me. I'm looking forward to this.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you. Robert has written a book called Faded Giant, forward by an old friend of ours, Raymond Fowler, who has been on Dreamland many times. This is about some incidents that are really unknown and yet of extraordinary importance to us as human beings and to our understanding of our place in this universe. Robert, where were you serving in 1967, if I may ask?
1967, I was stationed at Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana. That's right outside of Great Falls, Montana, about the middle of the state. And
what were you doing there?
Okay, I was assigned as a missile launch officer, which means I would go on alert status at one of the missile, what we call the Launch Control Center. And at those locations, we were able to control 10 nuclear missiles. This was the Minuteman 1 system at the time.
Right. Sitting and waiting to punch the button, how many hours a day?
Well, we were on duty essentially 24 hours, and then until we got relieved by another crew, and we'd do a changeover, and then we'd be off for maybe 3 or 4 days, and then come back on alert.
So you had sleeping quarters down there then?
Well, we had a cot down there. with a privacy curtain around it. It was pretty cramped down there. It was pretty well filled with computer equipment, electronic equipment. In those days, we didn't have miniaturized computers.
Right.
All this stuff was air cooled and got a little chilly down there at times, but yeah, it was pretty cramped down there.
How many of you were on the station at any given time?
At any given time, there were just two of us down there, a crew commander and a deputy crew commander. And
you went through drills and got codes from above and so forth during your time down there, I presume.
Right. We had drills. We mostly, coordinated any maintenance that had to be done. Made sure the missiles were on alert, ready to go in case we got the call.
Yeah. Did you ever were you ever face to face with any of these missiles? Did you ever see them go into, outside of their launch tubes, or how did you feel about all of this? It's a fascinating. You sat down there for years waiting for this for this terrible war that never actually happened, but it could have happened at any time.
Yeah, well, certainly we.
And
go ahead.
Where were the launch centers actually? Were they underground or?
Yes, these were underground capsules. There was a topside area where guards and we had cooking facilities up there, but mainly our facility, our launch control center, was underground, 60 feet underground, in a hardened capsule made of concrete and steel, and it was supposed to withstand a nuclear blast overhead.
I've been in one of those, and I had my doubts about whether or not that was really true.
Right.
Some of the guys in there seemed to think that it would really ruin their day if they got bombed from above.
Yeah, we were hoping they'd never tested it out real time.
Yeah. Now, that was an incredibly sensitive job. That you were highly trained for that, as I understand it.
Yeah, we had pretty extensive training. I think I would say over 8-9 months period. We had extensive training before we became operational crew members, and of course we had to go through qualification tests and that sort of thing. But yeah, it was our first line of the strategic concept of nuclear deterrence.
Now, were you concerned about possible entries into the area where the missiles were kept? In other words, was there a lot of security around